Here's something that's been nagging at people who watch this White House closely. Not the chaos you see on the surface that's almost expected now. It's the silences, the blank spaces where a president should be, the moments where the most powerful office in the world seems to be operating around someone rather than through them. Notice something the next time you watch footage of a high-level briefing at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Watch the eyes. Watch the hands. There's a particular kind of disengagement that career diplomats and national security veterans describe when they come back from meetings at this White House, a phrase that keeps surfacing in background conversations, in memoirs, in quiet hallway exchanges on Capitol Hill. The phrase is this: he wasn't really there, not physically absent, present in body, but somewhere else entirely. That's the thread, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. It started showing up in the public record in ways that were easy to dismiss individually, a rambling press conference answer that seemed to contradict the policy announced 24 hours earlier by his own team, a summit meeting with here aides visibly tensed as the president free associated through a prepared talking point. A moment at a NATO gathering captured on camera where Allied leaders exchanged glances that spoke entire paragraphs without a word. Each incident taken alone was explainable. A bad day, fatigue, off-the-cuff style. But taken together in sequence across months and years, the pattern is harder to wave away. And now, people with credentials, serious people who spent careers studying presidential decision-making and executive cognition, are saying so out loud. Here's the backstory, because it matters. Donald Trump entered the presidency in January 2017 as the oldest person ever to assume the office at that point, a record he later reclaimed upon his return in January 2025. He had no prior government or military experience, a governing style built almost entirely on instinct and improvisation, and a well-documented resistance to written intelligence briefings. Former Director of National Intelligence Dan Coates, a Republican, described in reported accounts a president who consumed information in ways that were unconventional, at best skeptic, all of expertise, dismissive of nuance, drawn to conclusions that validated what he already believed. That's a profile. It's not a diagnosis. But it is a starting point. The key players in this story are not household names. They are the analysts, the psychiatrists, the former White House physicians, and the national security professionals who have, with increasing frequency and decreasing anonymity, begun to speak. Dr. Bandy X. Lee, a forensic psychiatrist at Yale, organized a group of mental health professionals as far back as 2017 to assess what they described as a public health dimension to the president's behavior. Their work was controversial. The American Psychiatric Association's Goldwater Rule discourages diagnosing public figures without direct examination, but the conversation they opened has never fully closed. It's been simmering, and in recent months it has begun to boil again. Here's what the paper trail actually shows. Consider the publicly available record of presidential statements over the past year. Analysts at several nonpartisan research organizations have cataloged instances where the president's public remarks directly contradicted the stated positions of his own cabinet, not as a matter of policy evolution, but in real time, sometimes within the same news cycle, on trade, on foreign military commitments, on the status of ongoing negotiations. The pattern isn't ideological inconsistency, which presidents manage all the time. It's something more specific, a disconnection from the factual baseline of the situation as his own administration has defined it. There are the press conference moments. In one exchange, widely circulated among foreign policy analysts, the president was asked a direct question about a bilateral agreement his State Department had spent weeks negotiating. His answer referenced a version of events that, according to people briefed on the negotiations, bore little resemblance to where things actually stood. Aides scrambled afterward to clarify. The clarification was quiet. The original statement was not. There is the reported behavior inside the room. multiple accounts sourced to former senior officials across multiple administrations, compiled by outlets including The Atlantic, The New York Times, and The Washington Post, describe a president who struggles to sustain. In focus across the length of a standard National Security Council briefing, who returns repeatedly to tangential grievances, who occasionally needs to be redirected by staff, gently, back to the decision point on the table. One former senior official described it, in terms carefully chosen to avoid clinical language, as a man who finds governing interruptive. And then there is the specific category of statements that analysts have taken to calling temporal displacement, moments where the president speaks about past events as if they are present, or confuses the chronology of his own tenure's decisions. These are not, the analysts are careful to say, proof of anything diagnosable from the outside. But they are consistent with something, and the consistency is what's worth noting. Here's the moment where it clicks. The question was never really about any single gaffe or any single briefing room stumble. The question, the one that serious analysts are now asking seriously, is structural. What happens to strategic decision-making when the person at the apex of the decision chain is, by multiple independent accounts, not reliably engaged with the information that decision requires? What happens to the quality of outcomes? And here's the part that operates almost entirely outside public view: what fills the vacuum. Because vacuums in the Oval Office do not stay empty. They never have. When a president is disengaged, power doesn't disappear. It redistributes. It flows sometimes to the chief of staff, sometimes to a favored advisor with no formal authority, sometimes to cabinet members who learn to act first and inform later. The accountability architecture of the executive branch, the chain of command that runs from the president outward to the agencies and the military, depends on a president who is genuinely at the center of it. When that center is unreliable, the architecture doesn't collapse. It quietly reorganizes around the gap, and that reorganization is invisible to the public. It happens in meetings with no press pool, in decisions that never generate a paper trail, in the space between what is announced and what is actually decided. Doctors, including former White House physicians and psychiatrists who specialize in executive functioning, have begun to say, in published op-eds and in congressional stimony, that the profile of behaviors now documented in the public record warrants professional evaluation. They are not diagnosing. They are recommending a process. The distinction matters, but so does the recommendation itself. These are not political opponents. Several have Republican affiliations. What they share is professional alarm at a pattern they recognize from clinical contexts. A senior executive whose relationship with incoming information has become, in some measurable way, unreliable. And here's the part that should concern all of us, regardless of where you stand politically. We are not talking about a president whose policies you may or may not support. We are talking about a structural condition with structural consequences. The decisions that flow through this office on nuclear posture, on alliance commitments, on the deployment of military force, on trade negotiations that affect the economic lives of hundreds of millions of people those decisions require, at minimum, a president who is genuinely processing the information they're based on. When analysts describe a commander-in-chief who sounds like someone who wandered into the Oval Office, they are not being colorful. They are being precise, and precision in this context is what makes the concern serious. The 25th Amendment exists. It is there in the Constitution as a mechanism for exactly the scenario its framers could not fully describe but clearly anticipated. The possibility that a president might be present without being capable. It has never been invoked against a sitting president. The political threshold for invoking it is, in practical terms, nearly unreachable. But the fact that it exists, and that people with relevant expertise are now raising it in serious publications and serious settings, is itself a data point worth sitting with. Here's what we don't yet know. We don't know what, if anything, is documented inside the White House itself in medical records, in staff communications, in the assessments that the White House physician is required to maintain about the president's cognitive baseline. That record is not public. It may never be. We don't know who, specifically, is filling the decision-making gaps that multiple former officials describe or how accountable those are. Everyone is to anyone outside their immediate circle. Those are the open questions. They are not rhetorical. They are the actual questions. And they are not being asked loudly enough. The most consequential things that happen in this country often happen quietly. In rooms most people never see, around a desk where the weight of decision should belong to one person and sometimes, it seems, doesn't.